Okay. Okay, so I've got a couple of things that won't be particularly long. The first one is a bit of an update on the Integrated Care Systems Academy. Last time we had a lady called Kate Stevens come and did a workshop about what are the needs of the voluntary sector in terms of what the integrated care system might be doing about workforce and thinking about your needs as part of that, not just the statutory sector's needs. So where they've got to is there's a number of faculties that they set up, and it's a bit of a big statutory sector beast, if I'm honest. Lots of different structures and meetings that we don't want to get completely sucked into, but they did set up one faculty for specifically the voluntary and community sector across both counties. So it's only met once, about a week ago, but the vision is for it is it will be the place where we can have a really productive discussion, we hope, around what our needs are for the future, around training and leadership and all things recruitment, retention, all the same things that are being discussed in the public sector. And to try and work out, well, what is it? I think there are some very similar needs, but also some quite specific and different needs that the voluntary sector might have. And we've been involved recently in it, having these discussions, hoping to create more of a Herefordshire voice, because to be honest, we seem like the sort of smaller part of the bigger whole, and I think what I'm here today is to find out if there are people who'd like to be part of that faculty, speaking up on behalf of the voluntary sector in Herefordshire to influence the conversation and make sure that it is a conversation that helps Herefordshire voluntary sector. Where I'd like to see them considering is what is it the ICS is doing that could benefit the voluntary sector. There might be lots of opportunities where they provide training and development for their own workforce that we could be benefiting from too. And there might even be opportunities thinking about demonstrating the impact of the community sector, where we can encourage them to participate in things that we do and learn around what we do and how we might approach things differently. So it isn't really just a one-way street. But to do that, I think we've got to be at the table, we've got to be in the room. And I really just wanted to say that as that group is starting, I would really like people to put their hand up and get involved. So if anybody is interested in finding out more, I'm not sure how often they plan to meet. Do you know, Katie, is it monthly or less often?
It wasn't very clear.
Not very clear.
So, no idea.
Yeah, okay, so we can find out more about frequency, and I think some of it will be in person, some of it will be online. When it's in person, it's likely to be in Malvern. But at the moment, it feels like we're in a bit of a competition with Worcestershire, who've got more people and more capacity, and Herefordshire's voice is not that strong, which I am really keen that we change that and we have a stronger presence. So that's all I'll say on that for now. And if anybody wants to know more and is interested in potentially getting more involved, then please come and find me or email me, and we can have a chat about it. So the next one was an update on the community paradigm, which is this lovely poster that we've brought along. So for those of you who've been following this journey, this is an approach that we want to develop in Herefordshire across all of our sectors, across public organisations, voluntary sector, business, etc., to doing something different. So we're very much in a world where there's limited money, the money goes on expensive things of helping people at the sharp end of things. We all know we need to do something different. We need to invest more in prevention, we need to invest more in social root causes of some of the problems we have. But actually the way our public sector works and the constraints that they have makes that quite difficult. And the idea of a paradigm shift is that we work together to try and pivot that and come at it completely differently. So back in March, we brought together lots of leaders from all different sectors to say, is this something you're interested in? And I know some of you have heard this more than once, but some of you might be hearing it for the first time. There was a real resounding yes, we do want to commit to develop this approach to how we might work differently back in March. So at that point, everybody's saying yes to the concept, and we're committed to this, and it needs to be something that's long-term, it needs to be something that's the way we all work differently, and actually recognising it will take some quite bold, brave decision-making for some people to work very differently. The idea is we give over more power to communities to make decisions, to hold more resource and play more of a role in partnership and with our voluntary sector and public sector colleagues. So we got to that point and it was like, well, okay, how do we actually make it happen? What's next? So we brought together recognising that some of the challenges, and they're kind of depicted here in the middle. So, you know, one of the ideas is that we have a prevention plan for the county that starts to put investment into preventative things. The other is the idea of a community chest where money starts to be pooled and you know, we know there isn't loads of spare money around, so that's a challenge in itself, but I'll come on to that in a minute. How will we measure that this works? How are we going to come up with a different way of an alternative to commissioning? So thinking about, you know, the old ways, organisations will say, this is the money we've got, this is what we want, who can deliver it, and then you all fight over it, and some of you will deliver it, some of you don't get a shot at it, and it's not a very, you've told us many times, it's not the best way to get the most out of what communities can deliver. So how do we come up with a new way of doing that, which gives public sector spending some assurance around money, because they still have to account to powers that be about any public spending, but at the same time make it agile, make it work for everybody else. So the other is about how do we involve communities, what's the resource, the structure, the methods, how are we going to do that, because everybody agrees that we should do it, but nobody's particularly articulating how we go about doing any of these things. What would be the governance? How would we set this up? So these are all the challenging questions. So a lot of those questions, what I was hearing is communities are telling us, yep, we're in, get on with it. We look forward to hearing when this is going to happen. But these big questions are things that our public sector partners have got to grapple with. How do they do this? What's got to change for their organisation? Some of them are very big things, and we can't underestimate how much of a shift it is. So what I did with Hilary Hall at Herefordshire Council was to lead a small group of public sector leaders to say, how are we going to do this? How are we going to set out a way of working over the next 10 years that makes this actually happen? So we start to deliver things. So we start to move the power into communities of investment in terms of designing things together, delivering things differently, and having better outcomes for people in terms of prevention. And I'll be honest with you, we've had two sessions that came up with this, and we did a lot of talking about what we've got to do and what the problem is and how difficult it is to do it, and we're a little bit stuck. So, which is okay. Frustrated me, wants everything to happen immediately, and I know it won't. But in the background, we've been doing some other things with different leaders to say, how do we overcome some of these big obstacles? We've got a little plan a small plan for the short term. So we have some investment from Public Health, £200,000, to start to think about doing this in practice for our two health and wellbeing strategy county-wide priorities, which are the best starts in life and good mental well-being for all ages. So everybody in the county has signed up to those being a priority for the next 10 years. So Matt in Public Health has said, let's put £100,000 into each of the 2 priorities, and let's look at what we can do through a community paradigm approach to test that out. It's probably not as big and bold as we really where we started out, but it'll do for now is what I think. And in the meantime, we're having conversations with, this morning, that's why I'm late, I was meeting with the Chief Executive of the Council and the ICB to say we are a bit stuck. Your leaders have been scratching their heads about how they do this, and it feels like they need permission. They need to know how brave they can be. Have they got your say-so to be brave? And if being brave looks like this, are you okay with it? And this is where you get into the cultural changes we're actually trying to bring about are quite big. So Paul Walker and Simon Trickett, who are those 2 chief executives, have said they will now pick this up and start to do a big leadership piece with organisations to start to realise some of the scale of the ambition, which is where we started in March. In the meantime, while that's going on, so I was quite encouraged that that we're going to get them to give it a bit more welly, so to speak, because lots of things are, people are talking about the paradigm. We're talking about in lots of places, saying this is how we need to work, but we need to actually start to articulate what that looks like, what that means, and I can then come back to you and say stuff is going to happen. So thinking about the next community partnership, what we've agreed is to extend that day into a sort of 9 till 3, and we'll do some community partnership stuff first, and then later in the day we'll focus solely on this, which isn't just to say here's £200,000, how are you going to spend it? It's a bit more specific in that we've got 2 priorities. So what we want to think about is perhaps splitting into geographical areas of the county in this room. We'll have the leaders from public sector here to listen to all of this and be part of this conversation. And then get very specific in each sort of neighbourhood area. We'll probably break it down to what we call primary care network areas. So there are 5 of those in the county that are roughly quarters of the county and then the city centre. And I think we need to get into specifics about the strengths we have in those areas already, because we're not starting from zero. What's delivered currently that could be different. And I hear a lot of that as Health Watch regularly, people saying that doesn't work, why do people do this like that, and could this be different? Well, this is the chance. I think what the leaders in the guiding coalition were saying in this couple of workshops was we need to know what those things are, because whilst we don't have lots of spare money in our local organisations, we've got a lot of money that we spend on current services. What is the opportunity to move those things around? So can we repurpose what we've got? Can we use some of our staff and teams to just do things differently and work in a different way? So really the paradigm isn't just about getting some extra cash and spending it with communities. It's the whole spectrum of things, which does involve looking at funding, but it also involves let's stop doing some things that don't work very well, that don't make sense, that perpetuate a scenario where we're always in dealing with crisis and not really addressing the issue. And it's, again, easier said than done. We know that's what we need to do. How do we do it? So that's what that conversation's about. And then it needs to be about, so here is £200,000, and what would we do with it? Would we want to do things in localities? Would we want to do something county-wide? What would be the biggest, most impactful thing in terms of best start in life and good mental health? And some of the rays of sunshine on the diagram were the kinds of things that they were thinking would make a big difference to creating a Herefordshire where people live happier, live more resilient lives. So things like reducing loneliness, it's something most people in this room could play a part in what you're already doing. Things like making sure neighbourhoods are more connected and they flourish, and that communities are in the driving seat, so part of this conversation. So how do we do that beyond this room? So, and there are others, and I'll invite you to have a look at this over lunch, and it will come out with the slides as well. So that's really the focus in September, but I think in the background we're trying to raise the bar of ambition here to answer some of the tricky questions that I've basically failed to get people to nail down because they're not very straightforward and simple. I guess one other strand is and I was talking to Bobby Morris about this last week, is there's another part to this, is not just always thinking, well, what can we get out of public sector partners in terms of cash? Well, there's another part here. You know, we have funders in the county, we have charity, what would you call them, rotaries and things like that that raise funds, philanthropy and so on. Is there a piece of work we can do to build the case for change, that actually it would make real sense to start to pull that into one conversation about, would they invest in a Herefordshire community paradigm, community chest, that wasn't reliant on only public sector partners. So I think we're starting to think about that as a piece of work. And I guess my ask today is one, come along in September and be part of all of this, but also is anybody in the room interested in being part of that bit of work with Bobby around how we harness what other avenues we can to think about the community chest and building that investment. I'll probably stop there and ask if anybody wants to ask me any questions about where it's going or what you've heard, what we should be doing next.